Okay, so here's the writing assignment that went out today. So it's A Raisin in the Sun. Oh, it's not A Raisin in the Sun, sorry. It's modeled after Lorraine Hansberry's To Be Young, Gifted, and Black. Where it says to be young, gifted, and blank, that's where you get to figure out sort of either what adjective or what noun you want to fill in with that. For Hansberry, her race was something that was definitely a part of her identity. It was something that was important to her. You're going to explore an element that is important to your identity. It does not necessarily have to be race related. It doesn't have to be connected to your ethnicity. It just has to be something that is important to you. So you'll see, and I know you can read through all of this, and I'll walk through sort of each section a little bit more specifically in a bit. So she wrote 8 sections. You have to write 5 total. So you can choose any of these 4, but you have to do number 8. I think that number 1 might be the most difficult one to do, and I'll come back to that idea in just a little bit. But again, out of these 8 choices that you have, you get to choose, these 8 sections that you have to choose from, you have to do number 8, and then you get to choose the other 4. As this is a narrative, I'll be looking at things like grammar, spelling, punctuation, complete sentences, and things like that. But you don't have to worry about citations, parenthetical citations. You don't have to worry about embedding quotes, anything like that. This is an autobiography. It's a narrative. It's something that is a reflection of you, not necessarily a reflection of anything that we've read over the course of the semester. A couple of reasons I want you guys doing this. The first one is I think it's just important to reflect on things that you do, things that are rituals, habits, positive experiences for us. Let's take some time to reflect on those. I also think that this is a valuable tool for you if you plan on going to a 4-year school. This might be a good starting point for a personal statement in terms of some of the questions that colleges might ask of you as they attempt to get to know you as a potential student. So keep that in mind as you're going through and you're working on this particular assignment. I'm going to set this to the side. This I shared with you already. I shared it with you probably in your Google Drive. All right. So this is what I wanted you guys to look at, or why I wanted you to have this or bring this to class today or tomorrow. So this is your reading To Be Young, Gifted, and Black. Hansberry broke it up into 8 sections. You are also going to be writing or breaking your writing up into 8 sections, or I'm sorry, not 8 sections, 5 sections. You only have to shape your paper after 5 of her sections. If we look at the first section, part 1, this is the one where I said you might want to skip this one, but I do want to point a couple things out. So part 1, she's telling us why she's writing. She's getting back into, she's getting behind the purpose of this. She's not trying to argue anything. She's not giving us a literary analysis of anything. She's simply telling us the thing that drives her to write, her motivation to write. I realize that not all of us have a motivation to write other than Mrs. Weber's making us do this as our final writing assignment. So if you're not feeling super jazzed about this writing assignment, perhaps part 1 is one of those parts that you definitely know you're not going to write about. But I do want you to take notice of a couple of things. The first is that if you were to go through and count all of the sentences just in these 2 paragraphs, it would only total 7 sentences. And then also just noting that you have 2 paragraphs right here. So as we use To Be Young, Gifted, and Black as a bit of a mentor text, know that I'm asking you to write about 5 sections, but that does not necessarily mean that you're writing a 5-paragraph essay. It could mean that you're writing a 15-paragraph essay, but that each paragraph is going to have some variety of length to it. So if we look at part 1 or section 1 of her writing, again, it's 2 paragraphs. These are fairly short paragraphs, and between those 2 paragraphs, they only total 7 sentences. Okay, then we're going to look at section 2. So section 2 is short, right? We've got 4 paragraphs here. but those last two paragraphs are really short, right? So the third paragraph is 3 sentences. The last paragraph is just 1 sentence. That's fine. But as we look at section 2, see we've got a variety of length of paragraphs, even though there are only 4. We get some imagery and some description. This is about the location and the people. So feel free in this section to write about your neighborhood, write about your street, write about your front yard, write about the park down the street, some place that within the close proximity of your living is important to you. And then we look at section 3. So section 3, this goes on for more than 6 paragraphs. But again, if we're looking at paragraph length, there's some variety there, right? So if we just look at that very first sentence, that very first paragraph, it's really only one very simple sentence. And section 3 gives us that family dynamic. How love is shown, how caring is evident in her family, and the values that they have as a family. Keeping in mind, remember, this is where she talks about, they lived rather comfortably. If they needed new shoes, they got the new shoes. There was always food in the refrigerator and the pantry. They always had kind of more than they needed. She also writes about if they were sick, they were taken care of. It just wasn't a super lovey-dovey, touchy-feely household. So this is kind of your opportunity, should you choose this section, to write about maybe how love is shown or how caring is evident in the household. Perhaps you do come from a, lovey-dovey family. She did not. So this is, if you choose to write about number 3, that's what you would focus on. Again, does not have to be 6 paragraphs, but do shoot for some length and some variety in your sentences. That was 2. Sorry, I don't have my pages in order. There we go. Okay, and then we jump down to, also in section 3, at the end of that one, she writes about some grief and some struggle. This is where, remember, her dad passed away, and love, or sort of any sort of physical affection was shown. She writes about grief and struggle, but I don't have the expectation that you, as students at 16 and 17 years old, have necessarily experienced the same struggles or similar struggles as Hansberry. So if grief and struggle are not something that is a part of your life, don't feel like you're compelled to write it. Again, we write about what we know, we write about what we've experienced, especially for this memoir piece, this narrative piece that you're writing. So write about what has been a part of your life. All right, section number 4. This is where she's talking about birth order. Expectations that were placed on the older siblings, how the siblings treated her because there was such a big age difference between them. So think about this in the context of your own lives. If you are the oldest kid in your family, perhaps the expectations are different for you than they are for maybe the baby of the family. If you are the baby of the family, perhaps the way you are treated, the things that are asked of you, maybe are different than some of those older siblings that you have. I know some kids in other periods are gonna, if they're part of a blended family, and so that's something that also kind of changes the birth order and the structure there. If you're an only child, you can still write about the expectations that are placed on you, maybe treatment of you by parents or by cousins, by grandparents, because you are the only child. So that's definitely, even though birth order isn't necessarily an issue for you, there's definitely still things that you can choose to write about here. All right, and then we have section 5. So section 5, if we look at the reading here, this is her talking about those games that she played with the neighborhood kids on her street or out in front of her house. You don't necessarily need to spell out, like she did here, the games that were played, unless that is something that is important to you. So let's think about maybe some games, some traditions, some positive rituals, or positive things that maybe growing up you got to do with kids on your street, or maybe if your cousins are frequently in your lives, something like that. It can be holidays, it can be celebrations, but don't necessarily think about the really big celebrations. Focus on those everyday events. She's literally here. So Hansberry's talking about playing, tag in the middle of the street. She's talking about jumping rope. She's talking about playing a Simon Says type of a game. So those are all those everyday things, right? Those are those day-to-day things. So that's what you can also write about. And if you live on a street where maybe there aren't a lot of kids on your street, or that wasn't something that you had growing up, perhaps elementary school, right? Where like when you finally got to play dodgeball or kickball, like if those were the things that were positive things for you, and maybe you learned something from those positive things, go ahead and write about that. Section 6, right? Okay, so section 6, this is where she talks about her family moments. Just like section 5, the things that she's writing about here in section 6, they're not big deals. They are everyday things, but they are positive. So think about those family moments perhaps that you've had. Again, those everyday things. She writes about going to it's too hot to stay at home, so they go to a park, they put a blanket down, they're looking up at the stars. That's something that doesn't cost money or didn't really cost them any money, but it was something that was positive, and it stuck out for Hansberry in her own life. So maybe you guys do Taco Tuesdays as a family. Maybe Friday nights are family movie nights, and you get to pick that. You get to pick the movie. Maybe every time grandma comes over, you're doing a puzzle. Maybe it's just a walk that, maybe you and mom both have to walk the dog or something like that. So again, focusing on the small events, but the positive events and maybe how they've impacted you. Let's take a look at number 7. So section number 7 is here, and then it also finishes up right there. So section number 7, this is where we focus on a key family member. And I do want it to be a positive relationship that you have with this person. So it doesn't necessarily have to be somebody that is in your everyday life. As I mentioned to kids earlier today, if I was 16, 17, 18 years old and I was writing about this, if I'm looking at it through the lens of my high school experience, my relationship with my parents was a little bit strained at that time. So my positive relationship, probably my most positive relationship in the family at that point, was probably my grandma. So this would probably be where I would write about the role that my grandma played, or how I saw my grandma, maybe some of the things that I learned from her, or some of the things that I observed about her. So it doesn't necessarily have to be somebody who is in your household. It could be somebody that maybe you only see once a year, but still you have a positive relationship with that person. All right, jumping over to section number 8. Section number 8 for Hansberry is actually an editorial that she wrote to, I think it was the New York Times. I'm not asking you guys to write an editorial, but what she does right here, what she does talk about for the most part, is an aspect of her identity that is very important, which is her race. For you, that may not be the most important part of your identity, and that's perfectly fine. This is you figuring out an element of your identity that is important to you and that you get to write about it. I want you to use some imagery. I want you to use some explanation. I want you to explain why this element is important, how it shaped you or how it's guided you, how does it help to define who you are, and what role does it play in your life. It could be an everyday thing, it could be an occasional thing, but I do want you guys to look at some element of your identity and write about that. Again, she's writing about race because that's something that is important to her. I get that for every student, it's not going to be the same thing. And if you want to look back on this writing assignment, each of these parts, right, each section kind of has some of those either guiding questions or guiding ideas. When you get to the identity portion, remember, you're trying to fill in that blank of to be young, gifted, and something. It could be, like I wrote down here, it could be your faith, it could be your sport, it could be your race, your ethnicity, your culture, it could be an accomplishment, a hobby, maybe a hobby that's turned into a passion, it could be an academic focus. I know some of you are involved in community service outside of school, and that might be something that that helps to shape your identity or define who you are. So again, you have to pick 4 of these sections, right? You have to pick 4, and then number 8 is a must do. So please make sure that you get that taken care of. This is due June 7th through Turnitin at 11:59 p.m., no later than that. We will be working on it in class next week. We'll spend 1 day in class working on it and another day in class next week doing some review for A Raisin in the Sun. Email me if you have any questions about this, and I will get back to you.